What's up, Make Pop Music? It's Austin here from Austin Holt Audio and Visual and Make Pop Music, and I'm back with another tutorial for you guys. And for today's video, I wanted to answer a question that I've gotten quite a bit, but I've honestly kind of been putting off, and that is, what's on my mastering chain? What do I do to master my own mixes? All of that kind of stuff. And the reason I haven't really done it is because I'm not technically a mastering engineer. I'm just like a producer who mixes his own stuff and then most of the time masters his own stuff. I have no problem sending my stuff to a second mastering engineer. I have no problem outsourcing that. But typically the artists that I work with and my clients just prefer me to do it, so I go ahead and do it. The mastering community can be really quick to crucify anybody who is not trained in just specifically mastering, and most people think that's a whole different job, and I totally respect that opinion. But since you all wanted to see what I do on my mastering chain, I figured why not go ahead and deliver, because maybe you can even add this stuff to your 2-bus even if you are sending it to mastering later, or maybe this can just kind of help you understand the process of mastering, because I do feel like there is a bit of mystique and people don't really know what they're getting with mastering opposed to something like mixing. So before I ramble too much, let's just go ahead and hop in my DAW and I'll kind of explain everything that's in my master chain, why it's there, and kind of what my goal is for mastering my own tracks. Okay, so now we're actually in my DAW. Let's go ahead and take a look at kind of what the mix looked like and sounded like before I did anything on my 2-bus. And fair warning, what I like to do is I like to get my mixes kind of 80% probably there, 75 to 80% ready, you know, get my basic balances set, get all of my effects and stuff like that set, and then what I like to do is I like to pop on a 2-bus chain, just like my normal master chain, so I can start to see kind of how it's going to sound as a full finished off mix. That way there's really no guessing once I get to the end. So I like to get it generally there, just in terms of mixing, and then go ahead and add that master chain. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what it sounded like before anything happened on the master chain.
I'm so tired, I'm so stressed out, I'm not motivated. All this money and attention feels so overrated. Every day it's like I wake up just to make a couple dollars, sign some papers, make some records, talk with strangers.
We'll go to the hook.
Peace of mind, man, I gotta find some peace of mind. Peace of mind, I just gotta find some peace of mind. Some peace of mind, and I hope I find some peace of mind. Some peace of mind.
So we're not even close to peaking anything, which is really good. The only thing that really matters when you're doing all digital mixing and all digital mastering is that you want to make sure that this kind of master bus output right here doesn't go over 0, because once this goes over 0, it's coming out of your speakers over 0, and that's where you start getting the actual audible clipping. So I wanted to make sure that we weren't peaking at 0. Other than that, it doesn't really matter. I can turn it down in any of these plugins and it'll be fine. It's really just about how hard that's going to actually hit the compressor, and then, you know, Saturn and everything like that we're going to add in a minute. So I generally just like to get my levels to where they're not at 0. Going into VBC FG Red, and then other than that, I'm not too worried about it, because I'll start doing my gain control once I'm actually in that plugin. So let's go ahead and start adding stuff to our master chain.
I'm so tired, I'm so stressed out, I'm not motivated. All this money and attention feels so overrated. Every day it's like I wake up just.
So let's look at what we're doing here. I like to use it as my 2-bus compressor. By the way, if you hear me say 2-bus, that just means master. So 2-bus compressor, and this is just kind of a preset that I've modified after one of theirs. And so the threshold, I kind of just, you know, change depending on what the gain is like coming in. So since this is kind of a softer track coming in, I have to drive the threshold a little bit harder, and that's going to control how much gain reduction you start to actually get. So
I'm so tired, I'm so stressed out, I'm not motivated. All this money and attention feels so overrated. Every day it's like I wake up just to make a couple dollars, sign some papers.
So essentially, the threshold is controlling how much you're going to be squeezing it with the compressor. So what I typically like to go for on my master chain, first in the chain, is like anywhere between 1 and 3 dB of compression. I don't want to compress it too much, because that starts to kill the transients really early in mastering. But I also don't want it to be too open, because then it's kind of hard to control once you get ready to limit and do stuff like that. So I'll probably dial this back just a little bit.
Make some records, talk with strangers. All the glitters isn't gold, I'm losing control, nothing is making.
And I'm cool with that. Now let's move on to the ratio. So the ratio is going to be how hard you're actually compressing it, basically how aggressively you're compressing it. So you'll hear a difference. It's easiest to just hear it. Like I said, I'm not really a mastering guy, but it's basically the same as any other compressor that you would use. You just have to be a little bit more careful, because if you damage it at this stage, you're a little fucked. So let's go ahead and just play around with this ratio.
Make a a couple dollars, sign some papers, make some records, talk with strangers. Ooh, all the glitters isn't gold. I'm losing control, nothing is making me whole. All the drama and the stress, my life is a mess. The pressure is crushing my chest. I'm exhausted.
So I like to go for like 1.5 to 2, just because I want something pretty light. I'm not trying to squeeze it. I'm not trying to make it sound like a drum bus. I'm not trying to do anything crazy like that. So I really just need some light compression. So 1 to 3B of gain reduction at like a 1.5 ratio is typically fine. And then what I'll do with my attack is I'll have it a little bit up. That way we're not hitting it immediately. That way some of those transients can still kind of poke through. Because if I drive my attack all the way down here, then every time a kick drum or a snare drum hits, it's going to immediately squeeze it. And then that's where you'll start to get like that weird like kind of pumping effect. And I'll just kind of show you what I mean.
Wake up just to make a couple dollars, sign some papers, make some records, talk with strangers. Ooh, all the glitters isn't gold. I'm losing control, nothing is making me whole. All the drama and the stress, my life is a mess. The pressure is crushing my chest. I'm exhausted and I don't know what.
So I'll normally do it somewhere right around here, and then same thing with the release. I don't want it to release too quick, because if it does on this stage, it's really not going to do everything that I'm looking for in terms of just like controlling all of the sustain dynamics. But if I have it too slow, it's just going to squeeze everything way too much. So I'll kind of show you what it sounds like to play around with that.
It feels so overrated. Every day it's like I wake up just to make a couple dollars, sign some papers, make some records, talk with strangers. Ooh, all the glitters isn't gold. I'm losing control, nothing is making me whole. All the drama and
They also have an auto release, which I normally don't mess with at all, just because I don't want to get into that. Auto release might be cool for like a single track, but on my 2-bus, I don't really trust it enough. Then drive, I like to drive it just a little bit. This gives it some of that like analog characteristic.
attention feels so overrated. Every day it's like I wake up just to make a couple dollars, sign some papers, make some records, talk with strangers.
And to me, you can really hear this making a difference kind of in the low end and the low mids.
Ooh, all the glitters isn't gold. I'm losing control, nothing is making me whole. All the drama and the stress, my life is a mess. The pressure is crushing my chest. I'm exhausted and I don't know what to say, cause I got it.
And then makeup gain, this is basically just saying like, once you start to compress it, your gain will go down. So I like to just make this up, and this is where I kind of control how hard I'm gonna go into the next plugin. So if I'm, still not even close to peaking, I might drive it up a little bit more. If I'm coming really close to the top, or even if I'm peaking over it, I'll just bring it down. So let's see.
Everything I ever fucking wanted, but I pray to find some peace of mind. Peace of mind, man, I gotta find some peace of mind. Peace of mind, I just gotta find some peace of mind.
It's cool right about there. Now the next thing that I'll go into is, after I get my basic compression, I'll go into FabFilter Saturn. And I can't really explain this one too much. It's just kind of a preset that I found one day, Magic Mastering. And I like to mix it like 50% wet, just because at 100, I'll kind of show you. But what this is gonna do is this kind of like scoops out a little bit of the muddy kind of low mids and adds a little bit of brightness at the top and just a little bit of extra kind of sauce at the bottom. So let's just go ahead and listen with and without. Here's without.
Find some peace of mind, peace of mind. Man, I gotta find some peace of mind.
And then here's with.
Peace of mind, peace of mind. Man, I gotta find some peace of mind, peace of mind. I just gotta find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. And I hope
And then let me show you what it sounds like once you have that 100% wet.
I find some peace of mind, peace of mind. Man, I gotta find some peace of mind, peace of mind. I just gotta find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. And I hope I find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. I wake up.
So you can hear that that's kind of adding some airiness to it. It's kind of, to me, it's just making it a little bit tighter overall. It's not doing too much. It's kind of subtle, but I like it. I like that 50% wet, 50% dry, just because to me, it's doing everything that I want it to do. It's kind of tightening everything up, adding a little bit of shine, but it's not overdoing it, especially on the master chain. So I really like that, just to kind of add a little bit of extra sauce. Then we've got Waves Linen B, and I can't remember where I saw this, but I was just watching something one day where this guy was like, yeah, I always put the multi-electro mastering on my mastering chain just because it just sounds good. And I was like, so I tried it. And honestly, I immediately fell in love with it. So I've just been doing it kind of ever since. Basically, it's just a multi-band compression. And since it's linear phase, you're going to get a little bit less artifacts and aliasing and stuff like that. You're not going to get any kind of like phasing stereo problems on your master bus. So I really like doing this. It's like a really cheap plugin. It's really easy to get. And here's what it sounds like without it. And I don't like to do too much on it. I'm not doing like tons and tons of compression on this. But I do like to just kind of tighten it up a little bit. Here's without.
I gotta find some peace of mind, peace of mind. I just gotta find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. And I hope I find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. I wake up, hit repeat, same old shit like every week. Got too many people sending messages to go to sleep.
And this is a really good tool to have just in case like I'm getting to my mastering chain and I'm like, in general, the song sounds fine, but like the low mids are kind of just honky and nasty, or the top end is just really bright. You can start to kind of control it with this, where you can, you know, drive this down, and then
same old shit like every week. Got too many people sending messages to go to sleep. I'm too deep, search you then. All my walls are caving in, but I swear to shit that doesn't mean.
And then you can control, of course, do you want to boost it and then bring it back down to a normal level, or do you want to bring it down and kind of, you know, just let it dip a little bit. So what I like to do is I like to just kind of leave it on the normal setting. I don't really fuck with it too much unless I'm having an issue in my mix, which normally I'll just try to go back to the mix. Just on this preset, to me, it kind of works its wonder. Just does a little bit of magic. Then I'll just bring it down a little bit so we don't peak at all here, so we're not doing any like limiting within that, because this is where probably the bulk of my mastering chain comes from, and this is Pro L2. And let's just go over my settings, kind of what I'm doing and what to look out for. And I really like this. This is by far my favorite limiter I've ever used. I used Pro L1 for quite a bit, and then I just upgraded to 2, which is really nice because now they have like true peaking, which means like it's never going to go over this. And they've just got quite a bit more options in terms of like checking your loudness, and then they've got like the true peak limiting, like I said before. Oversampling now goes to 32. Dithering, you've got basic, optimized, weighted. They've added some more stuff around here. I really like it. It's really easy to use. You don't have to, you know, be a mastering engineer. They've got tons of really sick presets, and all the presets from version 1. So it's really nice. But let's go ahead and take a listen kind of with and without and see what I'm doing in terms of my limiting.
Hit repeat, same old shit like every week. Got too many people sending messages to go to sleep. I'm too deep, search you then. All my walls are caving in, but I swear to God I'm okay. At least I really hope I am.
So let's go ahead and take a look at what I'm actually doing. So this gain right here is basically just saying that it's going to increase that gain that much going into this limiter. So if we have it at 0,
Did I lose touch with reality from chasing shit?
you can see that we really don't get any gain reduction down here. That's going to be on the bottom. And if we drive it like this, prepare your ears, this is going to be really loud.
Peace of mind, and I gotta find some peace of mind. Peace of mind.
You can see that we're just getting way too much. So normally I like to get like between 3 and 5 kind of dB of gain reduction, especially like on the kicks and snares, just because what it's going to do is it tucks in those transients just a little bit, and then it brings the vocals up. And to me, it's really nice. It works a little bit of magic. And then I'll typically have this on transparent. Actually, I don't know why it was on punchy. It definitely wasn't in my final master. So I'll just have that on transparent.
I gotta find some peace of mind.
I don't really do anything with my look ahead. And attack, I like to have generally a little bit slower because I do want those transients to kind of peek through a little bit. I don't want them to get squashed too much. Otherwise, it just gets really mushy and kind of nasty sounding. I'll show you the difference.
Peace of mind. I just gotta find some peace of mind. Some peace of mind. And I hope I find some peace of mind. Some peace of mind.
But I don't want it all the way up, because if you have the attack all the way up, then typically it's not going to do quite enough. It's kind of similar to the other compressor that we talked about a little bit earlier. And then I like to have my release actually really fast on this one, because I'm not trying to get any long sustain. This is really just to like control my final peaks and make sure that everything is really good to distribute. So I don't have my release super long, just 10 milliseconds, super fast.
I wake up, hit repeat, same old shit like every week. Got too many people sending messages.
And I don't do anything with the transients or the release channel linking. To be honest, I'm not the guy to ask about that. I really have no idea what that's doing. And then I always have true peak limiting on. I typically just monitor in either -32 or -16. The loudness is actually really cool though, just to kind of see what you're at, because you can check momentary, short-term, or integrated LUFS.
Got too many people sending messages to go to sleep. I'm too deep, search you then. All my walls are caving in, but I swear
And I'm not like super particular about what kind of like LUFS I have coming out of my mix, as long as it sounds good and the transients are still popping and it's loud enough to go to distributors and not really kind of lack next to competitors. I'm normally good, so I don't pay attention too much. Normally though, just kind of by coincidence, I'm normally between like 9 and 11, so -9 and -11 LUFS. If that helps you at all, I would say don't pay too much attention to those numbers. Just make sure you're not way over limiting.
Peace of mind, peace of mind. Man, I gotta find some peace of mind, peace of mind.
And keep in mind too that mixes like this, mixes like Peace of Mind, where they're very low end heavy intentionally, they're gonna be a little bit harder to master just because that low end takes up so much energy. So it might look like the mix is loud as fuck just in terms of metering, but you're not really getting any perceived loudness because your top end is just really small in general just with how the song was produced. So it's really easy to kind of either over limit and that bass just controls everything, or under limit because you think that the whole song is loud when really it's just this 808. So sometimes when I'm mastering stuff like this, I like to just turn off the 808 and just see how it sounds without that and make sure that everything else is kind of up to standards as well.
Man, I gotta find some peace of mind, peace of mind. I just gotta find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. And I hope I find some peace of mind.
And honestly, this one turned out fine. The low end wasn't really causing me any issues. As you can see, we have the kick and the snare louder than pretty much everything else, so that's kind of dominating all of the levels. And then a couple more things to talk about, then we're pretty much done. I like to have my oversampling. If I'm doing a song that's really CPU heavy, sometimes I'll just turn it off around 2 or 4, and then I'll normally turn it to 16 or 32, depending on how hard I'm limiting. And basically, if you scroll over, Pro L, they actually tell you exactly what everything does. But oversampling is basically just making sure that you're not going to get like any aliasing or kind of like intersample peaking when you're doing any of the like really hard compression. So typically the harder you compress, the more you want to make sure that you oversample. If you don't, it's probably not the end of the world. Maybe like 1% of people will notice. And then dithering, basically I just set this to whatever the final master is going to be. So I normally just export my masters in 44.1 KHZ and then 24 bits, and that's pretty much it. So I like to just make sure that that's done. Optimized is fine for me. I've never really had any issues. And then this is what my whole master sounds like kind of with and without everything.
Some peace of mind. I wake up, hit repeat, same old spot, some peace of mind, peace of mind. I just gotta find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. And I hope I find some peace of mind, some peace of mind. I wake up, hit repeat, same old shit like every week.
And that's pretty much it. I mean, like I said, I don't do too much. It's just some light compression. Saturn kind of adds a little bit of harmonics on the low end and the top end just to kind of give me a little bit more brightness and a little bit tighter low end. And then that's pretty much it. Other than that, sometimes I'll automate this master bus. If I want to actually have some movement like in a bridge or something, just make sure that your master out is never going above 0, because that's where you'll start to get some peaking. Like I'll show you. If we take this to like 3, you'll see that we peak, and then that's where you actually start getting like the digital kind of distortion.
Got too many people sending messages to go to sleep. I'm too deep, special then, all my walls are caving.
So you can tell that we're starting to get some of that nasty crunch. So let me just undo that to 0. Perfect, now we're back. And then let's just talk about kind of how I export. Typically, I would just call this artist name, song name, master. If you're doing like a mastering session, you can always go like the date. So like 5/13/19. And then you can even do like 1 for master 1. And then typically what I'll do is I'll just make sure that I'm in 44.1, 24-bit. I don't really bother with any of these advanced options. Make sure my locators are set, and then I can just perform my audio export and everything is 100% fine. Typically, I'll also send kind of an MP3, and then I'll just make sure that, I'll edit the ID3 tag for them, and then I can just go ahead and make sure that this is in high quality mode at 320 kbit. So I really don't ever have any issues with my exporting, as long as my dithering is set and my kind of oversampling is set, and I'm just not pushing everything way too hard. I've never really had issues with stuff getting turned down by like Spotify or Tidal or YouTube or anything like that, just because they will start to normalize it if everything is just way overcooked. And what that does is like it starts to bring down your transients and everything like that, because as you master, you're already kind of squashing everything. And then if that digital distributor also has to go ahead and bring everything down, your whole mix is just going to sound a little bit weak. It would basically sound like if you brought this whole mastered bus down by, like, you know, let's just say, it would sound like that compared to. Did I lose touch with reality from? So if you, it's weird. It's like this weird balance of, like, if you overcook your master, they're basically going to put it out to where it's not even to where you had it. And then if you undercook it, they're not going to bring it back up to like a normal speed. So it's this really, really happy medium, which is why most mix engineers just prefer to hire a mastering engineer. I've never really had any issues that I found. Like I said, I've used some extra mastering engineers and they did fine work, but typically I'll just do it myself. Hopefully this kind of helped you out. Like I said, I am not really a mastering guy, so take all of this with a grain of salt. I really just did this because you guys wanted to see what was under the hood of my two bus. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll actually ask one of my mastering friends and let you know, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And there you have it. That's basically all I'm doing on my two bus or my master bus, and I master in the projects that I'm working with, like I said, and I'll normally turn that on like 70% through the mix. And it's really, really simple. I like to kind of nail everything in the mix as much as possible, and then just use that mastering chain really to just like tighten everything up a little bit with a little bit of compression, not too much at all, and then go ahead and just kind of get it up to commercial loudness, make sure everything's dithered and ready to go and get printed, and then it's really just about printing the files in the right format and making sure that everything's good to go. So keep it simple on your mastering bus. If you're doing way too much, there's probably issues in your mix. So like I said, get most of your mix ready, put together, get it like 70% there with all the balancing and the stuff that you want, and then just before you do like the final automation and, you know, the last couple tweaks, maybe go ahead and put a mastering chain on just so you can kind of start to hear what it's going to sound like when you are completely done with everything, because I've had so many times where I thought that the mix was perfect, then as soon as I master it, the snare drum is buried or the vocals are really bright, etc. So I don't think it really hurts to mix into a mastering chain. If you're not really comfortable with it, definitely just go ahead and outsource, hire a third-party mastering engineer that specifically does that for a living. Other than that though, this was my entire mastering chain, so hopefully you guys are satisfied. I know I've gotten this question a ton, so hopefully I did not disappoint, and I will see you guys next time. Let us know what you want to see, and until then, much love, make pop music. Peace out.
All the glitters isn't gold, I'm losing control. Nothing is making me whole. All the drama and the stress, my life is a mess. The pressure is crushing my chest. I'm exhausted and I don't know what to say, cause I got everything I ever fucking wanted, but I pray to find some peace of mind. Peace of mind. Man, I gotta find some peace of mind. Peace of mind.